Thank you.
And what a coincidence. We do have just that session coming up. We have Rob Key, longtime supporter, longtime friend, sponsor of AMAC, new international board member, a really thoughtful person on so many levels. If you haven't had a chance to spend really talking to Rob, you've missed out. Hopefully he's around later this afternoon to take advantage of that. But I think you will all enjoy this next 20 minutes. And without anything other delays, I will turn the time over to you, Rob. Thanks so much for being here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, hi everyone. So data quality on day 2 at the end of the day, it doesn't sound very sexy, but I'll try to make it a little sexy. Only in that when I'm talking about data quality, what we're really talking about is maybe one of the most fundamental challenges that we as humans are going to be facing over the next few years, which is what are these AI models that are going to govern our lives? What are they being trained on? How are they classifying data? And how are they generating data? And how are the decisions being made, right? And among all the sexiness of ChatGPT and others, what we do, what we're feeding these models is sometimes gets a little bit overlooked. So I have a question for all of you here. How many people are using like sentiment analysis, or you lean on sentiment analysis a little bit, right? Great. How many people know the accuracy of your model? All right, we have a couple over here. Most people don't, and don't feel bad if you don't, because it's opaque, right? Like measuring the performance of your accuracy isn't easy, but if you don't do it, you're kind of breaking the spirit of the AI EU Act in many ways around transparency and validation and accuracy. Because I think in the end of the day, we have an obligation to get it right, because it's not just data accuracy, it's capturing the opinions and thoughts from the data, right? So we have a problem out there. So if we look at the unstructured data landscape, it's not very pretty in many ways. There's a couple of things that IDC says that, correcting for data quality takes 40% of analysts' time, right? So a lot of you are probably hand correcting data. We have a client that said if we could improve our sentiment analysis from 65% to 85%, we will save 1,200 hours of people's time correcting data every month. And humans aren't great at correcting data too, because they don't always agree with each other. MIT says 46% of data leaders say these data quality issues are going to inhibit Gen AI initiatives. I think the other 54% just haven't thought about it enough, because it's going to inhibit much more than that as well. And within the Social Intelligence Lab has a study and said data quality remains among the top challenges, right? And the platforms themselves, the general platforms themselves will often say we're about 65% accurate. And that's because you have to create models that kind of try to fit for everything, right? But the world is specific. So fine-tuning, getting to the nuance isn't always very easy. So anyhow, for us, we've been spending, since 2008, we built our first machine learning model. We've been trying to get accuracy in this unstructured data set, right? And find truth in data. And I say truth in a cautious way, because the reality is finding truth within these data sets, for people agreeing to what truth is very hard. We can't create a truth algorithm. We can create a trust algorithm. Do people trust data? Do they trust? And that's what we're really trying to aspire to here a little bit as well. So even though you're not going to be building some of these models yourselves, if you're relying on third-party platforms, I think it's critically important to understand what the challenges are. We're seeing more and more brands taking control of their own models, and in part because the AI EU Act and other regulations coming through are basically saying, even if you're buying a third-party model, you are responsible for the governance, for its accuracy, for validation, and making sure it's being applied in the right way. The problem when we start with sentiment, and I'm saying sentiment in a generic sense because we're also talking about other classifications, emotions, tones, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You often start off with the problem of definitions. So sentiment analysis, it means different things to different people. Humans may agree, for coding, for sentiment, for example, you have to have humans sit around and say, is this positive or negative or neutral? They only agree with each other about 60 to 80% of the time. It gets worse when you start to say, is this an attitude of inspiring or frustration or other kind of emotional classifications? Because people are bringing their own biases to the table, right? It's a real challenge around that. For us, one of the critical things you have to do is have multiple humans look at the same thing and try to get to a gold standard, right? That's the gold standard which you kind of have to compare things against. There's an issue of precision versus recall, which I'll talk a little bit about as well. And then we have the problems of Booleans. For those of you who built Booleans, you know how painful they can be, right? You add a word to a Boolean string and you get all kinds of data that you don't want, and you eliminate it and you miss data that you actually need. So, humans, we can't build rules like that because we're bringing our own bias to how we create those Booleans anyhow. We're thinking from the top down, what do we think is important and what should be in this query? And the challenge with this, too, is we're sometimes trying to build classifications in data that actually don't really fit. And I'll talk about that a little bit about as well. But this black box nature of the models, the AIEU Act, I'm going to refer to it a few times, really focuses a little bit on high-risk use cases, right? But I would make the case that making bad business decisions on bad data and building products on bad data is a high-risk use case. So there will be increasing surveillance over what we're doing in this particular area. And, we used to have a challenge sometimes, too. We've always been focused on data quality. And we used to have to make the business case of saying, okay, if you're 65% accurate and you go to 90% accuracy, what's the business value of that 30%? Am I willing to spend more money to get to that level of accuracy? Or am I willing to spend the time and all the effort to get to 90% accuracy? And so it was a bit of a business case around that. But in the world of Gen AI, where these errors are being multiplied and amplified, we really have no choice but to kind of get it right. So here's a couple things we can do about it. Confirmation bias, we all bring it to the table. One of the things that we advocate is when you're looking at data sets that you do your top-down kind of analysis. These are the things that I think I'm going to find in the data set, but you need to do topic discovery too. There are tools and technologies where you can put the data in and it's going to bubble up from the bottom and tell you, this is what's happening in a data set that you don't know what to look for. This is the knowable unknowable, right? So you have to do this when you start to build your queries. You have to start to do this when you're doing your inquiries. The next thing is this concept of precision versus recall. Some of you are familiar with F1 scores. I don't know, anybody here? It's okay, so there's a few things here. When you're looking at data quality, precision is the nothing but the truth, right? It's how well your models actually can predict other third-party variables. In this case, like how well am I getting my precision versus the gold standard of humans? Recall is the whole truth. Am I capturing all the opinions within a particular data set? So you have to have, when you raise your precision, your recall may go down. When you raise your recall, you're capturing all the signals in the data set, your precision may go down. So you have to find the balance between those two. What we found is that if you want to start to do predictive analytics or start to use this data for more research cases, you have to get to about a 0.80 F1 score. It sounds kind of nerdy, but it's important. That actually exceeds human performance, because humans, again, aren't the individual human performance, because humans aren't great at all this again, in many cases. But most of the analysis that you are using is being used in many platforms is document level analysis. It's looking at an entire article and saying this is either positive, negative, or neutral. But there's so many nuances and expressions of opinion in that data set, you need to capture all of them. So that's important to keep in mind. The next area that we've found a lot of challenges with is emotional analysis. Sounds very interesting. Everybody's using Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions, so you may have seen that. The problem is that we found in text, emotional analysis is quite challenging. It doesn't really come through in the ways that it can be easily coded by humans. We've advocated moving to something called tone, which is expressed within text. And if you take a look at the types of classifications you can do, it actually helps lead to better accuracy and certainly better actionability. So what are some of the other things you can do? Number one is you have to make a commitment. Do you believe your organization needs to get this right? Do you need to get data accurate or not? And if not, people aren't going to make the investment. The second piece is not all data accuracy is necessary for all use cases. I mean, if you're doing crisis communications, maybe you can deal with a lower level of accuracy, capture with recall, capture all expressions of opinion, but, and that's good enough, right? If you want to get to predictive analytics, you want to get to trend discovery, you want to start to build campaigns for specific audiences, then of course you have to get to a high level of precision. The other parts of this, and I'm going to kind of show you in the next example, is you really need to know who your training data is coming from, how it's being trained, et cetera, as well. All kinds of issues about copyrights and other things as well. But even when you're training models, is it representing diversity? Are the people who are coding it biased? Again, you may not be building the models yourselves, but you need to be able to start to bring this type of inquiry into the platforms that you work with as well. And then you need to get to this concept of validation. So the beautiful thing around this concept of safe and trusted AI, which we all talk about, nobody's really against, I think, trusted AI. But the beautiful thing is that regulations are pushing us in this particular direction. This is kind of Gartner Group is kind of, I think this is a decent framework to kind of look at it, where you really need to kind of start to understand the accuracy of your model. You need to pay attention to how your models are being trained. You have to make sure that they're representative. And then you have to actually make sure that you are actually testing your model against your own data on a regular basis, right? You can't really deploy a model without knowing the accuracy of it. And it's not just a point in time. Language changes, right? So you have to track your model on a regular basis. There are things like drift detection and things that you can do. When language starts to change in your category, it can flag you and say, this model needs to be fine-tuned, right? So I need to keep that level of precision, et cetera. And you need to be able to monitor it, you need to track it as well. And then you have the human-in-the-loop governance. So you're looking at this as a human, and you can make changes and fine-tune as necessary. That's really important. And the use of LLMs. We've been working with large language models since 2019 with Roberta. We're always talking about it for generative AI. The power of using LLMs for sentiment analysis and other types of data classification should not be ignored. It's very powerful and is able to do many things that traditional kind of regression, bag words, rules-based type of sentiment analysis can't do. So one of the things that you need to do is make sure if you're going to train the data, you're getting it from the right training sources. Within social media data, it's polluted with all types of things, right? We found in many categories, many important categories, only about 40 to 60% of actual conversations are from real human beings. So you need to clean that out, then pull the training data, and then classify it even further. Is this news data? Is this consumer-generated data? Is this enterprise-related data? LLMs will allow you to do this type of classification. And then you can start to build your model. This is a kind of a money shot from the platform that we've built called Converseon NLP, which does all this stuff. It's a trusted AI platform for NLP, and you can build and deploy your own models. But every model that goes through this system is, you can see a report card of evaluation metrics. And you can see at the top, there's a training set, how big the training set is, and then you're actually doing sampling against this data on a regular basis. You can see the accuracy number, a 0.94. You're also doing a confusion matrix, and you're really kind of understanding what the model's performing, where it's going wrong, how I need to fine-tune it, et cetera. The other thing that we need to start to demand in this particular environment are confidence scores. So, and this is especially for Gen AI. If you start thinking about, okay, they're hallucinating, but it's partly they're hallucinating because they're not confident in what's the data that it's generating. They don't have the right data, so it just makes something up. The same thing with our classification models. We can tell you the accuracy, but we also display the level of confidence that the model has in terms of predicting this. I mean, to me, this is at the level of transparency that engenders trust. And if we have trust in data, we're going to get an adoption of data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can also set your own confidence score. So you can say, okay, I only want to see data above a 0.70 confidence or 0.50. You can do that depending on your category. So I'm advocating for this as well. So the beautiful thing is most regulation adds burden and time and costs into what we do. The beauty of the AI Act and others, they're forcing us into doing trusted AI, and that's actually making things better, faster, and cheaper. So it's lowering operation costs, like 3M and Bayer and others have talked about. It's improving accuracy, it's mitigating risk, and it's having better impact. So you can start to see there's a huge cost savings by having better data. So one thing I would really advocate at the end, and I have just a couple of minutes, is if you think about the survey world, about 20 to 40% of surveys are considered fraudulent, right? It's a problem. In fact, it's such a big problem that the Market Research Institute, SMR, and many organizations in that world have gotten together to create a data integrity initiative which says we are going to fight fraud because we have a duty to get this right. What we don't have currently in unstructured data, which makes up 90% of all data created last year, is a similar data integrity initiative. And what I hope that we can do, and having worked with AMAC and all of you folks here, that we can start to look at this in a way that is going to raise the standards for the entire industry. So it means commitment. Do we commit? Do we educate? How do we make it happen? It's not going to happen on day one. But if we have a very significant responsibility, because not only are we doing this for our own purposes, the data that is going into the Gen AI is unstructured data. So the data better be accurate. And I would really recommend to all brands, I'm old enough to remember like the early days of SEO. Remember where we talked about Google was the front page to your brand and you needed to know what was in Google and you had to displace negative and put in positive. That you need to know what the foundational models are saying about your brand. You need to find out if the information is inaccurate. You have a responsibility to unlock your own data, enrich your data, and make it available to fine-tune and through techniques like RAG, right? We have a responsibility, all of us in here, to help get the foundational models right, because they are going to make the determination in many ways about our brand reputation and what people think about ourselves. So I hope I can just leave you with that. I'm hoping to work with other organizations and pull that all together. It's a big initiative, but an important one. So I am done. Thank you, everybody.
You are at the end of your presentation, but you are far from done. Let us all be clear. So, thank you. I mean, that is the lightning round of data and the importance of validating and making sure that it has the integrity that you want it to and that you need it to in order to be able to be data-led and have those insights. First of all, I appreciate your contributions in the community and how you genuinely want to bring all of the best of everyone together, you know, from partners to other associations to be able to leverage all of that. You talked in your presentation about understanding the bias, right? Programmatic bias, those regional bias. What does the testing model look like for that? Is that something that there's, you know, open source data for that? Is that something that has to be so specific? Are there certain models that I think as people are using these more in-house, what should they be looking for as red flags if they can't do the full regression analysis?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you start to get into training data, one of the challenges is that you have to create models with the same type of framework, which is for us is, how is the average reader going to interpret this to be, right? And it's challenging because sometimes if brands are building their own models, they're bringing all that kind of industry and brand knowledge to the classification, so they're reading into things that a normal reader wouldn't see. So it starts with that, but you also have to have really, really, really precise definitions. And the thing is, you know, it's like what the Supreme Court said about obscenity at one point, you know, it's like I know it when I see it, but I can't really define it. Well, a lot of these classifications are the same way, right? I know inspiring when I see it, but can you define it? And by the way, can you define edge cases? An example, truth. If I say I use the product with my baby at night because my baby sleeps better. What's that an expression of? It's an expression of truth. There's no word in that phrase that means truth. So the work that goes up front to do these definitions really tightly, get the edge cases, you have trained coders, you have intercoder reliability when there's divergence, et cetera, is really, and making sure that the coding teams are representative. you want diversity because people do bring their own experiences to the table no matter what. So it starts there, and then you run models, and then you're understanding where things are off, and that's where you have human-in-the-loop governance, and then you can fine-tune models on a regular basis. Brands have to take control of their own model quality. I mean, that's what it comes down to. You just can't leave it into a third party. And you can understand with the platforms, they have to build models that are going to be good enough for everybody, but not best enough for the brands that need it.
Love that. Thank you so much. Continue to challenge us and continue to be our champion for all things as far as the quality of it. Another round of applause for Rob, please. Thank you so much.